May I request Dr. Trivedi to give his address, please?
Today, when I stand here in front of you, I was reminded of the days when I used to teach. I'd gone on a sabbatical on a subject called the public policy environment of business. So I tweaked it, and now today I'll try and attempt to bring before you some of my thoughts on the public policy environment of the shipping business. Being a trained economist, I have a way of saying things, but I also have a way of saying things based on certain categorizations. So please don't mind if I make too many categorizations, but then I leave it up to you to integrate all of them. First of all, to put the current subject under discussion in this session in proper perspective, I'd like to call your attention to the ministry, which, because I'm talking about public policy environment of shipping industry, I start with the ministry. The ministry is called the Ministry of Ports, Shipping and Waterways. In any shipping business, ports take a big priority because they handle, as they say, 90% of our cargo, and we live off that cargo. A whole lot of GDP is made out of that cargo that comes in from import and exports. Then comes the Ministry of Ports, Shipping. Now, shipping is a big sector where finance and public policy is involved. Then comes the Waterways, which is a developing field in India. It's pretty nascent, so it needs both investment and a very progressive policy. The government has been trying to put all these policies together, I must admit, and the recent Global Maritime Summit was actually a start or trigger to the very aggressive policies that the government has announced. We'll come to it. I have with us Mr. Ayal Devli, who's a statistics man who knows a lot of numbers. I'm sure he'll tell you more about these things. But when I come to you with my little presentation here, since I said we start with ports, I'll just briefly go to the next slide. And, well, this I've said in some sense. To the next one. The private sector has to face these three realities. One is about the government and policymakers. I'll come to that in two parts. And the second and the third are obvious. Everybody knows that they have to face competition, which Admiral Lamba also alluded to. And Admiral Chauhan also alluded to, is between, let's say, the private sector competition with the PSUs in the shipbuilding area, private sector with PSU in the shipping area, ownership of VLCCs, and so on and so forth. But then there is more to it. The government can do two things. One is spending money. I'll show you a couple of slides later how money can be directly used to incentivize what we do in terms of infrastructure. The government could also do something which doesn't need money. This is my big theory. To tweak the rules of the game in a particular manner, the government needs no money. It just needs to, I don't know if fiat is a good word to use, but government needs to give some direction. Now, if that direction comes in through the policy making, it is not always that you need money there. The private sector will bring in the money, make it the facilitation, government as a facilitation desk. You do what private sector wants to do, not necessarily beyond a need and greed parameter, but then you have to facilitate, because in a situation like any other country, we are also a sovereign republic, but We have rules, we have a constitution, we have the boundaries, we have our ways of thinking, our polity, and our elected governments. But they all, if they fall into the policy space, that doesn't need money. The money is needed perhaps at the port and waterways to develop their infrastructure, the roads, the connectivity, the railways connecting the ports, and so on and so forth. So some of the things that the government can do is provide a direct incentive. And lots of governments do that. I don't know whether the scheme in Kerala is still surviving, but there was a scheme which Kerala government had floated that every ton of modal shift, the more the cargo you carry on coastal, there will be a 1 rupee or something per ton subsidy. That was a direct incentive to move on to the coastal shipping rather than move too much on the roads and railways. The other thing is about the government devising PPP schemes. Now, there's so much that can be done and said about PPP, and I'll come to you a little more in detail given the 20 minutes that I have. Rather than go by the slides or whatever, I will come to the PPP a little earlier then, because I think that needs a lot of understanding what and how the PPP works in ports. In fact, the port PPPs should not be confused with the PPPs being done on the road and other places. It is a very different kind of a PPP, because port necessarily is on the coast, and coast necessarily has to be guarded. If I do a PPP on a road from Delhi to Vrindavan, I mean, there's no huge external security risk. But if I do a PPP on a port or on the coast of India, then I need to be concerned also about the security. So there's a very big difference. What locations of roads are innumerable. Locations of ports are not innumerable, so that restricts how much PPP we can do on ports. Of course, we can do a lot of PPP on waterways, which are internal, and so on and so forth. But on the ports, which is the let's say, the entire femur, the big bone of the shipping industry, we need to be careful. At the same time, we need to be open. Now, how do we balance these two criteria is another big thing that the PPPs have to look into. Because I'll tell you, every port private sector participant has to go through a very intense security check. That is not very widely known, but port, if I was, let's say, from country X, a company from country X, and I was bidding for a berth on Cochin port, my security will be done intensely through all the agencies into the depths and layers of what my company is comprised of. And so, I mean, but if you were to do it somehow in a road project, that's not that deep a security check. So we are, while maintaining security, opening up the ports to PPP. In fact, the Global Maritime Summit has this time committed up to, today we have about 52% or 40%, 48 or 52% of cargo being handled by privately operated berths and jetties. The Global Maritime International Summit this time actually declared it to be 100% in future. So you can imagine how big a jump that's going to be. None of the ports or jetties in any of the major ports, as Admiral Chauhan said, major has no great thing about major, but it's an old thing that major corresponds to a government port. So all these 12 major ports, the government ports, the cargo handling in the future would be 100%, which means from a 52 or 50% currently privately owned PPP projects, it'll go to 100% PPP. You can imagine how much the government is pushing. And PPP basically means the private sector brings in money, operates, and then there is a revenue share or something. So the current government's policy of converting the Major Port Act into a Land Port Authority Act, which means that you've become a landlord, the others do the business. So that's going to be completely done in the next few years, as per the latest announcement by the ministry. Some of the direct incentives we've heard, we've spoken about it. Some of the cargo carrying policies which are difficult, I'll also allude to them, but there's so many and so many examples that we just have to see a few to tell you where exactly the problems can arise and how fundamental and basic these problems are. Hence, from all the examples I have, I always quote this example of a RoRo, roll-on, roll-off. The RoRo facility was to take the entire truckload and roll it onto a cargo basically for coastal, and take it from, let's say, from Kolkata or Haldia to Paradip, from there to Chennai, or from there to Cochin, and from there to Mumbai, dropping off, picking up on it's a RoRo thing. But the first RoRo thing which came up a few years back had to face a very big problem. What is that problem? Problem is that a RoRo truck typically is operated, the truck which comes on the road is operated by the transport rules of the state. Given what we all know happens, there is overloading and here and there, all sorts of RTOs involved, and things are not perfect on the road. So the regulations on the road are not that strict, but you cannot load 2 tons of extra material on a ship, especially on a small cargo ship. There, the trucks would get held up because they were coming overloaded, thinking that this will pass. For a long time it happened, it had to be streamlined. Another problem that arose was a very minor problem, but it was a problem that normally the trucks that are pulled have a puller engine, and then there's a rump, which is a container. So what they do is they go in, leave the rump there, bring the front portion out. But these were in the Vehicles Registration Act, they had both same numbers. Now, there had to be a facilitation by changing the rule that they can have different registration numbers, because if it lands from Haldia to in Cochin, it will have a different number and there will be no tug of the same number to pull it out. So it has to have its own independence. That rule itself, I'll tell you, took about a couple of years to change. I hope it's been changed and streamlined today. These are certain issues where I say public policy can be done without investment, with no expense, but yet it facilitates moving of the shipping business. And it's true about any other business, but if you're talking about shipping, there are a whole lot of rules which can be tweaked. The government has to pay nothing. There's no expense about it, but yes, it does help. There is, so that said, the government, in the same thought pattern, has done the Land Port Authority Act. It has stayed off. It has said, well, I'll be the landlord. And these ports are not small ports. I mean, let me tell you, Kandla Port, for example, has, but we have to make policy to create SEZs there, industrial areas there, storage facilities, tank farms, and so on and so forth, which the government is doing. And as a land port authority, I can do it much more. As a land port authority, the government has delegated a whole lot of powers to the boards of these ports so that they can take their decisions. I remember the days when all these little investment decisions would come to the government. And for what reason, I don't understand, but used to come for government because they had limited powers. If you do it beyond so many years of leasing, please send it to government. If you do it beyond so much of $1 million or million rupees, send it to the port, to the government. So things of this kind used to happen now, which are now, with the Land Port Authority Bill, higher vesting of authority in the ports, the boards of the port. A lot of things have been facilitated and with no expense. They have just passed an act, things have started moving. One of the things that we talk about shipping, and all of us have heard about it, is how do we arrange a higher shipping registration in the country. That also, there are two things. There are flags of convenience, countries which are called flags of convenience. They have such rules and regulations that people, even a lot of Indian companies, wish to flag there because it makes them less regulated. So you can see, if you were an economist, you'll say you reduce the regulation and you increase the registration of shipping tonnage in your country. Now, how do you reduce the regulation? To what extent can you reduce? Yeah, I mean, to the extent that we don't become an insecure state to be registered or flagged in, but yet it has to be made easy. Today also, leasing, of course, now with the Gift City, I was told Gift City leasing facilities have come up. Leasing of a ship was very difficult in India. And I used to be chairman of the airlines, and I thought leasing of aircraft was so easy. You just go to Ireland or you go to some place and there'll be companies that will bring you a Boeing or an Airbus or somebody and you just lease it in. The registration number gets to become a VT so-and-so, and that's it. But in the shipping, when I landed in the shipping ministry, I saw this is a huge issue. You can't lease it, you can't change the what do you call that, number to the Indian number without going through a huge lot of, if that was relaxed, leasing, now it has been done, I believe. If you were to lease through the Gift City, there is a process, there is a SOP, and it's made it all. So what I'm saying is that without too much of expense, tweaking our government policies, making it easy for compliance, can do all these things. One leading example, which will be discussed, I think, more exhaustively by Mr. Devli, is the matter of cabotage. Now, cabotage typically, as you know, deals with using the coastal run by ships of, let's say, Indian origin, Indian flagged. That's the extreme cabotage. That extreme cabotage exists in America, being whatever liberal country America may be, but the cabotage is very, very hard in America. No ship which is non-US made, non-US owned, can do coastal run in America, on the American coast. And this has been since what is called, famously called the Jones Act of 1920. Since then, it's been done. Now, we are in a category of countries which have a relaxable cabotage.
Dr. Trivedi, you got 1 minute to wind up.
Yeah, that's the last point, in fact. And on this relaxable cabotage, we have taken certain stance earlier. I believe the stance is changing more towards a stricter cabotage. But that wavering of policy, I'm not sure whether I should be happy about it, but I think it has to be thought about very carefully. These were some of my random thoughts. Overarching thought is the public policy environment of business, shipping business in India. We can talk more about it. and there's plenty more to talk. Given the paucity of time, I would once again thank the organizers to allow me to put my thoughts through to you. And I'm really honored to be here and speaking in the IPRD seminar of the MMF. Thank you so much.